This is Chapter 3, Demand and Supply and Market Equilibrium. This audio voiceover will be in at least 2 parts. This chapter's kind of long, but very important. So, supply and demand. There is no way to repeal the laws of supply and demand. It is just the interaction between buyers and sellers. No one, again, can repeal those laws. This supply and demand takes place in markets, and a market is just nothing more than a collection of information that takes place between buyers and sellers. There's, of course, the stock market, the supermarket, the real estate market, etc. In a market economy or capitalism, like we learned in the last chapter, transactions between buyers and sellers are voluntary. No one is forced to purchase a product they don't expect to benefit from, and no one has to sell a product they don't expect to benefit from. So in those voluntary exchanges, prices are determined. So demand is nothing more than the amount consumers are willing and able to purchase at a given price. We say other things equal because we know that price is not the only thing that affects demand decisions. But when we're looking at the law of demand, we're only considering price. So as price falls, quantity demanded rises. As price rises, quantity demanded falls. Nothing more logical than that. So price can act as an obstacle to buyers. We'll spend more time in the law of diminishing marginal utility in Econ 202. But the income effect and substitution effect are very easy to understand. The income effect is just changes in a person's purchasing power when the price of one good they purchase changes. For example, in May of 2020, gas prices are very cheap. So that may increase someone's purchasing power if they don't see a change in their income. The substitution effect is just that when people have 2 goods available, each that satisfy the same want, they will likely substitute the cheaper product for the more expensive one. For example, if they feel like they get the same utility, the same benefit from a Honda Civic and a Toyota Corolla, they'll likely buy the one that's the least expensive. So the demand curve always slopes down to the right to show that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. This particular example is just looking at the price per bushel of wheat per week. And at the higher price, a lower quantity is demanded. Always have your price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal. With the production possibilities curve, it did not matter because you're just looking at a trade-off. But this could be anything. This could be Happy Meals per day at a McDonald's. If they charge $5, they would probably sell fewer, maybe 10, than if they reduce the price to $1 where they might sell 80. So the quantity demanded is every point on this demand curve represents a change in price. Price only, other things being equal. So we could add more buyers in the market, and your total quantities would increase. Your price wouldn't change. We'd just look at more buyers. Maybe we were only looking at one buyer in the previous slide. So we know that there are other factors besides price, and we say that these non-price factors shift the entire demand curve. A larger amount purchased at each and every possible price, or a lower demand at each and every possible price. So now we're looking at factors other than price. So let's look at some of those things that can shift the entire demand curve, and to the right or the left. Changes in consumer taste and preferences. Well, this one's easy to see. When something is very popular, we see an increase in demand at each and every possible price. Now, don't assume that just because there is a change in demand, there's a change in supply. There may not be, or it may take a long time for it to catch up. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a large increase in demand for disposable gloves and masks So we would expect an increase in demand at each and every possible price. That curve moves to the right. Stores sold out of them, so some of those people who had purchased them or who had them on hand could charge a much higher price on the secondary market, like on Facebook, etc., and obtain more than what they paid for them. We might consider that price gouging, but it is just the market at work. There were people willing to pay more for those items because they wanted them. So that change in consumer preference increased the demand curve, and supply didn't catch up for a while. So they were more expensive on that secondary market. In the second example there, a change in the number of buyers. That could be, obviously, if we see an increase in the number of buyers, more people wanting that item, we would see an increase in demand. Decrease in number of buyers, decrease in demand. An example of that, think in terms of demographics, age, income level, etc. The soft drink market is mainly teenagers and young adults. So if those soft drink makers like Pepsi and Coke see the demographic trends and the numbers in that age group declining, they will expect a decrease in demand at each and every possible price for their product. Of course, many of them have added to their offerings to increase that number of buyers, like adding sparkling water beverages and even bottled water. Another thing that can determine demand, change in income. Most goods are normal goods. That means an increase in income increases demand, or a decrease in income decreases demand. Most everything follows that. Restaurant meals, clothing, etc. Our income goes up, we'd likely buy more of those at each and every possible price. There is, however, an economics definition called an inferior good, and this is important to remember. An increase in income will decrease demand for those goods, or a decrease in income would increase in demand. For example, if we see an increase in our income, there are things that we probably don't want to ever see again, like generic products or maybe even ramen noodles. So there's an opposite shift in the demand curve when income goes up. When there's a recession, there could be an increase in demand actually for those types of items. People see their incomes go down, they may increase their demand for those generics and ramen noodles and things that could be considered inferior goods. Now, it doesn't mean the product is necessarily inferior. It's just a choice because of income. Other things that can change or shift the entire demand curve, a change in the price of related goods. Substitutes are goods that are easily exchanged for one another. The more you buy of one, the less you would buy of the other. For example, when Redbox first came into the market, everybody knows what Redboxes are, where you rent movies for pretty cheap. They started out, I believe, at $1. So when they came in at that really cheap price, people started renting movies from Redbox. They increased their quantity demanded because of the lower price. And that meant a decrease in demand at Blockbuster, the video stores that used to be so prevalent. They eventually all went out of business. So a decrease in the price of one decreased the demand for the other, same direction as the price change for substitutes. Now, complementary goods, we have the opposite. Complementary goods are used together for consumption. So, a change in the price of one of those causes demand for the other to shift in the opposite direction of the price change. For example, if hot dogs are cheaper, maybe they're on sale this week at the grocery store, so a decrease in the price of hot dogs might increase the demand for hot dog buns at each and every possible price, because they're complements used together usually for consumption. The more you buy of one, the more you would buy of the other. The last determinant of demand, change in consumer expectations. If we expect prices to increase in the future, that could increase demand now as people buy more of the product, expecting prices to go up even more in the future. Another bullet point that's not mentioned here that's extremely important is a change in product availability. If people expect things to not be available anymore at all, that would increase demand now. Oddly enough, during the coronavirus epidemic, toilet paper became that product. People expected to not be able to buy it for some reason. So that was a huge increase in demand, and toilet paper was sold out just about everywhere. Of course, it didn't take long for that supply to catch up, but at least initially, people expecting not to be able to buy any, some people started hoarding and bought up all the toilet paper. So there was an increase in demand at each and every possible price. Another change in expectations, future income. People generally buy more expensive items like cars or houses if they expect their income to increase in the future, or at least remain the same. With the COVID-19 epidemic, we saw a lot of people concerned about losing their jobs. Many did lose their jobs. So that really dramatically decreased the demand for those types of goods. Housing market, nobody was buying houses or cars or anything because of their concern that they wouldn't get a job in the future. So this slide just gives some examples of changes in buyers' taste, number of buyers, changes in income, that would shift that entire demand curve. But remember the difference. The law of demand only looks at price only. None of these other things changed. When we're looking at a change in total demand, we're looking at a change or a shift in the entire demand curve, moving to the right for an increase, left for a decrease. And I realize it doesn't mean a whole lot till we put the supply curve with it, because that's how we get prices determined. It's also how we get wages determined in a market economy. So we'll look at that in the next voiceover.